This is the Morning News on 10. Nearly 2 weeks after the rescue of 78 Sri Lankan asylum seekers, there's still no end in sight to the Oceanic Viking saga. The economy is looming as a tricky issue for the federal government, with interest rates all but certain to rise again next week. Joining us to discuss the week in federal politics is Finance Minister Lindsay from Melbourne and Acting Shadow Treasurer Helen Coonan, who's in Sydney this morning. Senator Coonan has kindly agreed to fill in for Joe Hockey this week because of this. Have a look at the photo. There it is, Senator Coonan. The Joe, we're looking at a picture at the moment there of Joe and wife Melissa and new baby Ignatius. I believe he's been on the phone to you already, Senator, to explain what a difficult time he had during the birth.
Well, yes, first of all, congratulations to Joe and Melissa. This is very good news. But Joe's message to me was that Melissa was doing well, but he was exhausted, which I thought was a very interesting way of putting the male's view of birth.
The male perspective, indeed. All right, down to tin tax. Firstly to you, Mr Tanner, if I may. The Indonesian solution is clearly not working. Is the government considering actually paying the Sri Lankans to call it all off?
Well, Ron, we're dealing here with a very specific and unusual situation where Australia responded to an Indonesian request to help a vessel that was in distress in Indonesian waters, and we have certain obligations under international maritime law in those circumstances which we're honouring. And of course we got an obligation to treat the people that have been assisted with some dignity and decency, and that's also occurring. And we've got no plans of the kind that you're referring to, but it's a very difficult situation that we and the Indonesian government are trying to work our way through to get a satisfactory outcome.
Senator Coonan, in the latter years, obviously, of the Howard government, you had very similar problems here. What would you do in this sort of situation?
Well, look, I think it's certainly not very helpful to be asking us what we do in circumstances where we've been asking Mr Rudd all week. What are the communications he's having with the Indonesians? What are his plans? What are the communications? What's he actually going to do about this? Because it's quite obvious that Mr Rudd has lost control of our borders, and it is a serious situation. It's very embarrassing to Australia. These 78 souls obviously had set out to come to Australia, and it's in circumstances where we think it's up to the government, who, after all, softened their approach to border protection, gave everybody the invite to come down to Australia, and now they're paying the price, of course, of a situation where we think they've got to solve the problem. They don't appear to have a plan B, but they certainly need to level with the Australian people about what their plans are.
Mr Tanner, at the beginning of the week, the Prime Minister was talking very tough on this whole issue. Now, at the end of the week, it seems that Christmas Island is still on the table.
Ron, we've just heard the kind of inflammatory rhetoric that we've had all week from the Liberal Party on this issue, which is both unprincipled and wrong, and is designed to disguise the fact that they have no alternative position. They didn't oppose the reforms that we put in place a year or two ago, and they know that the average number of boats and number of asylum seekers that have appeared in Australia or off Australia's coast in the time we've been in office has been roughly the same as the average over the time the Howard government was in office. It's basically influenced by world events. We've had a terrible end to an appalling civil war in Sri Lanka, which has clearly contributed to what has been a global increase of about 30% in the number of asylum seekers around the world in the last 3 years.
In circumstances, now, if you knew, quite frankly,
once again we're hearing more inflammatory rhetoric,
but there is a simple...
Well, there's a simple answer to your question, Helen, that is, are you proposing to reverse the changes we've made? That's the question that the Liberal Party will not answer.
That is just
it didn't oppose those changes.
The issue, Lindsay.
Well, you can't both criticise what we've done and say we're not sure whether we change it. The normal thing for an opposition is to say here's what's wrong and here's what we do to fix it.
What I can say is that you're in government, you have let this happen. There have been 46 boats, over 2,000 people. Christmas Island must be bulging at the seams.
Roughly the same as what occurred when the Howard government was in office.
Where you are the government, you're the ones that have to have a plan as to how you're going to deal with this. This has to be solved immediately, not after we win the next